because Blaise, of course, was employed in the French Quarter.
Were there many Paul Newman sightings around town? Interesting. Why don't we start?
Okay.
Again, this is a show about what's considered to be fairly colorful politics
Okay.
by some folks. You're not an.
I'm sorry, before interrupt, when we ask a question, can you?
You're not a native of the state of Louisiana, quite obviously.
Right.
What were your first impressions when you first came to Louisiana of the politics here? Did you find it different?
Oh, certainly. I mean, I came here directly from England, where I don't see politics as necessarily less corrupt, but it's certainly considerably more discreet. I think it's the blatancy of the colour of the political life that strikes you initially. That the people make no bones about the fact that political life is not always on the up and up here. In fact, seldom is.
Can you give me an example of that?
Well, when I first came here, Edwin Edwards was firmly entrenched as governor. This was the time of the Tonson Park scandals, you remember that? And one of the first things I remember Edwards saying in connection with some dubious campaign contributions was that he conceded that it was illegal for the people to give it to him, but that it was not illegal for him to take it. So that he always made no bones about the fact that he was treading a very fine line between the illegal acts and legal acts. So that there was, you always notice here that people don't, or people in public life especially, do not talk in terms of behaviour being reprehensible or otherwise. They talk in terms of it being technically illegal or otherwise. So that the proposition that people are in public life in order to enrich themselves is one that is openly accepted in many places.
How come? Why do people accept it?
In Louisiana, I think a lot of things. First of all, I think things are changing. I think we have discovered ethics in Louisiana in recent years, and I think partly because of the economic problems we've had. There's been a feeling in the past that because so many of our revenues were generated from mineral royalties and so on, that in a sense it wasn't taxpayers' money. The people weren't paying the money. Therefore, if they got their share, maybe they felt content. The other thing is that I think that politicians in Louisiana are extremely shrewd, and they have devised a system here which corrupts the people as well. I think if you look, for instance, at our tax system in this state is notoriously regressive. But I think if you look at some aspects of that, for instance, the homestead exemption. I mean, in this state, very few people pay taxes on their houses. Very few, even people who live in opulent conditions. That's the reason. First of all, because so much of the value is exempt under the taxation laws. And secondly, because there's a pattern of consistently underassessing property in this state, which makes the people a party to and a beneficiary of a corrupt system, which is why one of the reasons that the homestead exemption and the virtual absence of property taxes on residential property is one of the principal reasons that's a sacred cow here. But you can see that the people who are keeping corrupt politicians in office are themselves benefiting from those corrupt practices. I think that's a large part of it. Also, people talk in terms of the Mediterranean ambience and the happy-go-lucky lifestyle that's been associated with New Orleans in particular and southern Louisiana for a long time. I mean, everyone here was having a real good time. I mean, making babies with octoroons and drinking and dancing on the street. It was only when my countrymen arrived on the scene that they started cutting all that fun out. So there is I think that the joie de vivre that you associate with this place is in some way consistent with a laissez-faire attitude towards the towards political corruption. You know. So it was, I mean, this is a fun place, and fun. People having fun don't always have time to be too fastidious on ethical matters. You know.
Well, you say it's a fun place. Is politics no longer fun now? I mean, you say that people are discovering ethics.
I think it's not much fun as it was. I mean, I think that we don't have such outrageous characters as we've had in the past. You know, it's not long ago, it's 20 years ago here, we had rural sheriffs running bordellos in the backwoods. We've progressed so far now that our most famous colourful politician, of course, is Edwin Edwards. I think we've progressed to the stage now when he is probably the only person in the state who thinks he has a chance of returning to public life. And he is talking in terms of running for governor again next time. But I don't think many people take that as a serious threat.
You know, there's cycles in Louisiana politics. We've got these colorful guys that come in, they're populist, they promise a lot, and there's scandals, and there's a wave of reform.
Remember that I'm sorry, you talk about reform. Remember that Edwin Edwards came into office as a reform candidate, as did Sherman Bernard, our discredited insurance commissioner, as did Doug Green, our current insurance commissioner, who's in a sea of troubles right now. So,
well, my question is then, if all these people come in as reform candidates and nothing changes, I mean, is there really anything to this change? I mean, is it just a cycle of populist reform, and nothing really changes?
There may be a cycle. I'm more inclined to think that times have become so hard here, and that a lot of people have been suffering for so long. We have not only the casualties of the current economic crisis, we also have that long-term unemployed and underemployed class, mainly black, of course, here. I think we've got to the stage now when people's tolerance has been reduced because their own standards of living have been affected. And people are much less inclined to turn a blind eye to corruption when times are hard. I mean, I think when they can actually, when people who are out of work can see that Edwin Edwards is going to Las Vegas with suitcases full of cash, then even in Louisiana some resentments can build. And I think that's been happening. That's the mood you feel. Now, when the good times start to roll again, who knows? Who knows? But it is a fact that reformers in this state tend to change once they get into office. Yeah.
They get reformed themselves.
They get to their need to be rehabilitated. Then, yeah. I think there is such a long tradition here of people entering office and becoming personally so much richer than they used to be, that even the reformers, when they get into office, find that the opportunities are hard to resist.
Being an outsider, being from another country, not being a native Louisianan, do you buy this argument, obviously, that Louisiana politics is different?
I think I beg your pardon. I think Louisiana politics is different. I don't buy the argument that it's uniquely corrupt. I think if you go to Illinois, as an obvious case, New York, even Kentucky, I think you find the extent of political corruption is at least comparable with ours. The differences, it seems to me, are mostly of style. That what's always astonished me is how much public officials are prepared to concede in this area. I mean, to what extent public officials are quite prepared to admit that they do benefit personally from public office. I mean, public officials benefit personally from public office all over the world, including where I come from. But they're generally at least embarrassed about it, or at least secretive about it, if not embarrassed. Here, it's kind of a badge of honor. You know? I mean, part of Edwin Edwards' appeal is tremendous, as you know, a man of immense charm and wit. And part of that appeal, it seems to me, has been in his freely admitting that he skirts the law and lives high on the hog, and has a big ranch in Texas, has gambling junkets to Las Vegas, and people respond to that because it tends to add to his appeal, because I guess it's a lifestyle that people would like to enjoy for themselves, and he is the lovable rogue. I mean, the rogue who can get away with stuff tends to excite admiration. I mean, a lot of people like that, and Edwin Edwards is one of the prime examples.
In terms of the color of Louisiana politics, there are certain things that make the state unique, or let's say things on the grassroots level, things in campaigns that make things unique, such as Schwegmann's bags. Can you describe, well, for existence, what the Schwegmann's bag phenomenon is in New Orleans?
Well, Schwegmann's is a grocery chain that's done very well by selling relatively cheaply. It's, so therefore, the name Schwegmann has been synonymous in the city for a long time with the good guy, the guy who provides reasonable groceries. And of course, they bag their groceries in just brown paper bags, the sort of bags that Saints fans used to have over their heads when they were losing very badly. And come election time, whether it's to elect a person or whether it's a proposition, Mr. Schwegmann, the owner, will print on the bag his endorsement or his views or his political philosophy or whatever, so that all over the city and the suburbs, people will take their groceries home, and with them they will take Mr. Schwegmann's message: vote for so-and-so. So it's become a fairly potent political tool, and much feared. There's one of the great phrases in New Orleans from people who beat Schwegmann-backed candidates is, "Hey, we beat the bag." So it's become an integral part of the folklore here. It's now on a challenge, in fact, because the challenger for the mayor's race, Donald Mintz, has the support of Mr. Schwegmann. And the incumbent, Sidney Bartholomew, has been seeking a ruling from the Ethics Commission as to whether there is a monetary value on this endorsement, which could be construed as violating the contribution laws. So the fact that they're prepared to go to those lengths, I think, underlines the potency of the bag. Yeah, that is part of every election here. Every election in which Mr. Schwegmann takes a hand, the bag is a factor, and a potent one at that.
Find it a little I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was wondering if we could get you to sort of backtrack a little bit and explain that in New Orleans.
Schwegmann himself is a political animal, as you know. Okay.
Right, but I guess we need the larger issue.
Put it in a context of some sort, yeah.
In the context of Louisiana politics, we find it odd that there's this phenomenon of groceries.
Okay. Well, one thing that's unique about the politics of Louisiana, and specifically the politics of New Orleans, is the role that is played in election after election by a grocery bag. We have in the New Orleans area a grocery chain called Schwegmann, which is known for selling high volume, relatively cheap groceries, and it's become something of a hero of the people. And Schwegmann was owned by a member of the Public Service Commission, now retired, whose son is also a member of the Public Service Commission and has had aspirations for other offices. So it's a very political concern. And at every election in which Mr. Schwegmann takes an interest, he will print on his grocery bags his endorsement or his view of a tax proposition or whatever's on the ballot. Will be printed on every bag that comes out of the grocery store, so that every customer going home will take with them Mr. Schwegmann's advice on what to do in this election, which of course makes it a very potent political tool here. And in fact, one of the familiar phrases in New Orleans politics these days can be heard from candidates who managed to defeat a Schwegmann-endorsed candidate, which is, quote, "We beat the bag." So it is now just accepted as a root integral part of the process. Okay.
You covered Jefferson Parish politics for a long time.
Yes, I did.
Is Jefferson Parish the wave of the future, the suburbs and the growth of the Republican Party? In state politics, at least?
Is Jefferson Parish the wave of the future? I sincerely hope not. Jefferson Parish has the famous distinction, of course, of electing David Duke to the State House of Representatives, which I think is in some ways a fluke. I think that could have happened in any number of places. It could have happened in a Boston suburb as easily as it happened here. It happened here partly because of demographics, because the district is not 97% white. It happened here because his opponent in the runoff was, well, a dweeb is the word we usually apply to his opponent. You know, I think we can regard that as something of a quirk even in Louisiana. With the future, well, I mean, Jefferson Parish, like suburbs all over the country. I mean, it was created by white flight. A lot of its people grew up in areas of New Orleans and left to escape what they saw as the evils of desegregation. And to a very large extent, they've succeeded. So we have a white community just across the canal, which of course pays almost nothing to support the infrastructure, horrible word, but support the infrastructure of the city on which they depend. But I don't see that Jefferson Parish is unlike any other white suburban area. I mean, it's pleasant. I mean, it has like all these, you know, has its oak shaded avenues and so on, and it's lily white and like bedroom communities. I think you can find them all over the place. I think the election of David Duke is an embarrassment to Jefferson Parish and the whole of Louisiana. But remember that Duke was elected from a very small part of Jefferson Parish, and an atypical one at that.
Jefferson Parish has a very colorful sheriff, as you're well aware.
Yes.
And we were wondering if you remembered in the campaign a couple of years ago, he used a very unusual commercial in his campaign against Art Lantini.
The unusual commercial? Are you thinking of the Melting Man? Yes, I remember that. That's well, I don't pretend to understand advertising, what makes it good, but apparently that's gone down as the Melting Man commercial has gone down as one of the most effective tactics in that election. Remember that in that election, Harry Lee was way behind for a long time and was thought to be on the way out. He'd become a virtual pariah. In Mardi Gras parades, which is, you know, the most significant things happen at Mardi Gras. Harry would always every year have this big float with an enormous effigy of his own face, of himself at the front. And in the past, there had been some competition to ride with Harry. About the time we're talking about, I mean, anyone could have got on there. I mean, it was, you know, Harry was the most visible pariah in the parish. That ad, coupled again with some mistakes by his opponent, is thought to have helped turn the tide. But yeah, but that was like the wimp image, the wimp message, that he was a guy who would melt under pressure or under heat, I guess. Yeah.
Well, explain this though for somebody who's not from Louisiana. They see that commercial and it's very funny, but if they heard you say this is one of the turning points of the campaign, they might be confused. How could you explain that to them?
Why is that at a turning point?
Well, just I guess not so much specific about the commercial, but what's the appeal?
It seems really negative, and of course on the national scale we've been hearing a lot of writing and political pundits talking about negative imagery in the '88 presidential campaign and that sort of thing. But okay.
The Mr. Softly commercial was extremely negative, and negative campaigning was popular in Louisiana before the rest of the country latched on. There's always been, you know, bad-mouthing opponents has always been a part of the game. The significance of that particular commercial was that Harry Lee was thought to be finished and was on a defensive and was being rightly attacked for various failures of office, for letting convicted rapists roam the street and all sorts of stuff like that. So he was on defensive, and we had the challenger was there for a spell representing reform, honesty, competence, all the usual things that are kind of regarded as boring in Louisiana politics. And that commercial was important because it was at the stage when Harry Lee was able to turn the tables and suggest that his challenger, in his capacity as a prosecutor, as an assistant district attorney, had himself lacked the fortitude to stick to his guns. And the melting face was regarded as a very easy to understand, potent symbol of what in another election was known as the wimp factor. And it's the same thing. I mean, if you're able to portray your opponent as less than manly, that takes you a long way. It's worth another 8 or 10 points, and here as much as anywhere else. So Harry was always a likable person, but vulnerable as incompetent and woolly-minded and frequently absent. By taking away from his opponent the competent platform, and that helped him tremendously in turning it around. There was people who believe in competent administrations.
Right.
But he's a likable, roly-poly man. I like Harry. I just think he shouldn't be sheriff. Look at the campaigns of yesteryear. I mean, they fight in Pickwick Papers in the Eaton-Swift election. I mean, the barbs. I mean, I don't buy it. I think negative campaigning is part of the game. I think if your opponent is a child molester, then fine. Or if you can suggest that he is. I mean, it always seems to be part. I mean, it's obviously an issue. The character of your opponent's an issue, of course.
I guess in Louisiana, you never get these things like, they're taking off the gloves. It just seems to be like, of course there's negative campaigns and all.
They never had the gloves on.
Yeah,
it's like just from day one. Many cases.
well, this is a backwards state. We haven't got any gloves here.
The only follow-up I wanted to ask you about was that Lee's on the way out. He's got all this baggage. They have this commercial. It's a turning point. Is this possibly a sad commentary on the voters?
I think it's a very sad commentary on the voters. I think it's also a very sad commentary on the strength of his opposition, because Lee really was in a lot of trouble. He'd alienated a lot of women with on this rape case we mentioned earlier. There was also a very famous occasion when he instructed his deputies to arrest blacks in, quote, rinky-dink cars straying into black neighborhoods, which you just would expect to alienate another large segment of the population. Yeah, I mean, this is a classic case, and by no means unprecedented, of a person with a winsome personality, which Harry Lee certainly has. He's a likable, cordial person. Even with me, he's very cordial. It's a classic case of people's response to someone's personal attributes outweighing any reasonable objective assessment of their performance in office.
Going back to the cycles idea of Louisiana politics, would you say there were a fair number of people who perhaps idealistically took a look at what happened in the governor's election 2 years ago and the election of Romer and said, boy, this is a change. This is a wave of reform. Louisiana politics is really going to change?
Oh yes, Buddy Romer was elected and came into office with on a very strong sentiment that this was we were going to do something new here. We were going to introduce integrity to government. We were going to reform the tax program. We were going to become a progressive state. We were going to join the United States. That was a very strong feeling, and I think among his supporters that feeling persists. Although of course there have been various disappointments in the legislature. I mean, he has not managed to affect the reform as many reforms as he wished. But oh yes, certainly. I mean, I think Buddy Romer was seen as the embodiment of a new era, of an era in which colourful politicians would give way to competent managers, in which lovable rogues would give way to honest men dedicated to the public weal. Yeah, but that's kind of a lot to ask from one man, as the legislature resoundingly demonstrated.
Are they still saying things like that?
Some people are. I think. I don't think you get the feeling anymore of a great upsurge of probity. But I think that among his supporters, there's still that feeling. I think there's still the feeling also that he is not the one-term governor that a lot of people are portraying him as. I mean, Edwin Edwards, of course, included. Buddy Romer has done some good things in his state, in the realms of education and tax reform in a kind of to the anemic extent that has been allowed to by the legislature. But yeah, I think the feeling if the feeling doesn't persist, the hope does.
So reform hasn't hit the legislature yet?
No, no. Well, I mean, that takes time. And of course, legislators are in the grip of either of their constituents, which is bad, on account of these antiquated notions we have, or in the grip of special interests, oil interests, and so on, which is worse. That is what has made it very difficult for. I mean, one of the areas we've begun to make some slight progress in is the environment. I mean, Louisiana has got the worst environmental record of any state in the Union, which is terrible because we have the most fragile and extensive wetlands in the nation. So we're making some slight progress in that as well. But I mean, the legislature remains beholden to the oil industry. Remains their political survival depends on placating people who have been exposed to decades of propaganda about the sanctity of the homestead exemption and other matters. So these things don't happen overnight, you know. And I think any slight change to the better is good. And I think that as the economy begins to pick up a bit as well, you might see the mood change. But I think certainly it's politics as theatre, politics as fun, is not what it was. I mean, Earl Long wouldn't. People like Earl Long wouldn't survive anymore here. Even though there are a lot of people in the legislature, well, not a lot of people around here who admire some of the things Earl Long did, and there are some in the legislature, 60 Rayburn in particular, who remember him as a friend and as someone they admire as a progressive force, which in certain senses he was, especially on segregation.
In the years that you've been here in Louisiana, again, we're doing a show about the color of Louisiana politics, the uniqueness of it. Can you think of something that very quickly encapsulates why Louisiana politics is different, a story, an incident?
Oh, you should give me notice of that. I need time on that.
Yeah, right. I have a couple questions unless you have.
Let me think of something.
There are a couple. They're a little scattered, but question. We were at this Republican caucus on Saturday, okay, and there are all these Republicans in different stripes there. Is there a story in the emergence of the Republican Party as a force, or is it just a sort of the same old folks, just with a new party label in Louisiana?
Oh, it's the same old folks. I think the Republican Party was a mere cipher in the state until very recently. A lot of people have switched. A lot of candidates and office holders have switched because they figure it's going to help them remain in office, especially in places like Jefferson Parish. It doesn't represent any shift in political philosophy, it seems to me. I think if you look at a Louisiana Democrat, like the Boll Weevils of a few years ago, for instance, I defy anybody to find a difference between them and a mainstream Republican. It's become fashionable to change, but I mean, there is no change in political philosophy. We do, of course, have in parts we now have a viable two-party system, which we never had before. Which, in a sense, I mean, I think some Republicans, the old established Republicans, kind of resent this because the ones who've been there since they could get them all in a telephone box, they say. What they found was that when the Republican administration was in, every Republican in the state got a federal job. Now that doesn't happen so much. So, no, I don't see it as. I mean, it reflects what is a very conservative attitudes of the state, and I'm bound to say the racist attitudes of the state. And of course, racist has become synonymous with, when you say conservative now, you mean this guy's a bigot, right, in some way. So it's a more logical haven for people whose stripes have not changed.
So it is sort of our perception that ideology plays less of a role here in becoming a Republican than it might in other states. I mean, Ben Baggert really more conservative?
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. It's not a matter of ideology. I mean, I don't think they've changed at all. I think the label has become more acceptable because of what's happened to the Democratic Party on the national level. I I mentioned racism, and I think the perception among many old-style Democrats that the Democratic Party on a national level has become liberal to an extent that is incompatible with their notions. Has played a part of it. But it's not because they weren't always conservative, just because, you know, they always say, I didn't desert the Democratic Party, the Democratic Party deserted me. And you get this from all these no-count local politicians who are just looking to save their wretched skins, you know. And a lot of them I know, a lot of our office holders who've switched parties have not gladdened the hearts of the local GOP. I mean, there's a lot of people, well, of course, they can't even keep Duke out. So, but these are not all desirable recruits to rank of the GOP, according to the party itself.
Well, it's confusing to me that a Fox McClellan becomes a Republican. I'm wondering about, you know, just...
Well, Fox McKithen becomes a Republican not because he awoke one morning to see some blinding light and undergo some great philosophical shift. He's looking for a way to get himself in the U.S. Senate, and I guess he figured that that enough people have jumped ship to make that his best prospect. You know, I mean, the incumbent, the Democrat, has been there for 3 terms.
So it's not incompatible with Louisiana populism to be a Republican?
Oh, this is rank opportunism. It has nothing to do with principle or dogma or anything other than it's a practical matter. How do I best save my skin?
Let me just follow up on that point for 1 second. A statement on David Duke, who, although he may at this point be something of an embarrassment to Louisiana, Perez. And is David Duke just sort of the last in the line of this? Or?
David Duke certainly belongs in a recognizable Louisiana tradition. It goes back a long way. He's not. I don't think he's the last, and he's not the only either. I mean, he has lots of people in the legislature who share his views, who have been somewhat less overt in espousing them, and he says things that other people wouldn't dare to. But there are plenty of people here who represent lily white areas who agree with him 100% on things like reform of the welfare system and minority set-asides and busing. I mean, no, I mean, if David Duke were the only racist around, he wouldn't be in office. I mean, let's not underestimate the extent of those pernicious attitudes. But let us also concede that this is not just Louisiana, not just Jefferson Parish. I mean, given the same circumstances, a David Duke, who after all has a certain amount of personal appeal as well, thanks in part to the plastic surgeon. But yeah, a man like David Duke could succeed elsewhere, and indeed, that is what David Duke is saying, that his election is merely the first in a series of great victories for the Aryan cause. I think he's wrong. I think he won't last very long. But it was a quirk here. I'm not trying to underestimate the extent of racism, but it's not a uniquely Louisiana phenomenon.
The other question I wanted to ask is, there's a certain spectator sport quality, of course, to all of this. Always has been. You know, it's fun, you sit and talk about her alarm and talk about even Judge Perez and the time he built his...
We'll go to the projects and look, the consequences are that very large segments of the population have been betrayed by their leaders, have been left in generations of poverty. The result being drug addiction and crime waves, which we solve by sending the cops in to round them up. I mean, it is a great spectator sport, but the price you pay is a tragic one. I mean, what we have, when you make politics fun, you betray the people. It happens that the people in this state have been willing to go along with it, but it is a tremendous immorality. I mean, government here has not protected the people in the way that it's supposed to, and you know, we've all enjoyed it. I mean, we'll enjoy the characters. I mean, Edwin Edwards is as fine a man to spend 10 minutes with as you wish to meet. But when you think that these are the people who have suitcases of money to go gambling within Las Vegas. And at the same time, their friends of the oil business are poisoning the environment. At the same time, the lousy taxation system they espouse leaves generations of large numbers of people out of the mainstream. Then then it becomes the ultimate political crime. And I think it's when people start to realise that they will entirely cease electing characters and start looking for people who have a decent concern for the rest of humanity. But it may sound very pompous. I'm sorry about that, but it's.
Passionate.
Twice. Yeah.
Is this documented?
If we asked him about it, would he deny it?
I wouldn't deny it with him, and they always remark on how different, how kind the aging process has been to David. I'm sorry I can't think of some joke to encapsulate the whole thing. That's a little bit of a tall order. Some bon mot. There are various politicians who've broken their campaign promises and then, after being elected, have been confronted with it and said, "Yeah, well, I lied." I mean, everyone says that, but that's too well known.
What the story about the person that made the campaign promises and actually kept them?
I haven't heard that one.
You sure about that, Paul? We find out about all the
Yeah, sure. And in fact, when the convention's here, we produced that guide to New Orleans, and I had a little page in there of, political stories about. I don't know if you saw it, but there's all sorts of. Well, there's one Shady. That may be one, and Representative Shady Wall, which is a great name. You know this story? He was arrested for driving his Cadillac at 110 miles an hour, and. Not a great crime, but anyway, he was sentenced to a day in jail. And he was at the jailhouse, at the door of the jailhouse, and the reporters were there, and he said, "This is one more way I can serve my constituents," which is a nice idea that going to the penitentiary is a way, going to the slammer is just, this should be, only did it is, probably does more for his constituents than most of the things he did.
We had an interesting.
There's a very famous. Remember that story of Earl Long, who said that his guide to politics is never write what you can phone, and never phone what you can say face to face, and never say face to face what you can nod, and never nod what you can wink, and so on and so forth.
When we first came here, you must remember Rick Connery.
Oh, Rick Tonry, yeah, he's yeah.
And we were present at his coming out of jail party down in Araby.
The VFW hall, right?
Okay, yeah.
We were all in Araby, and it just struck us that this was a quintessential Louisiana experience, that it was packed with people, his constituents, to celebrate him getting out of jail on a boat fraud or whatever.
That's something that struck me as well here. That when I come from, people are embarrassed when they've been to prison. I mean, it isn't the case here. I mean, they will celebrate when they come out, and they will be seen in the normal around the restaurants and so on, and be back in the swim. And there's no stigma attached to imprisonment, at least not for that kind of crime. But
That's fine.
That's right.
Thank you very much.